Welcome to the StoryLens podcast, where your story is our focus. We explore wealth, legacy, and purpose through a process that starts with deep listening and leads to one-of-a-kind strategies. At StoryOne, we believe the best planning begins with you.
Welcome to the StoryLens podcast. This is our second episode of the podcast. We are grateful for you to be with us today. On this podcast, we have John Christensen, who's the CEO and Senior Wealth Advisor for StoryOne, Cameron Bond, who is a Senior Wealth Advisor, and myself, Kenny Conklin. I am the COO. We are partners. In StoryOne, in the first episode, we covered some topics around what a multi-family office is and why John and Cam decided to embark on that path. In this episode, we're going to cover more about the StoryLens. Mm-hmm. It's interesting because names really matter. We spend a lot of time, what are we going to name our kids? What are we going to name a business? What are we going to name whatever? With StoryOne, the two of you spent a lot of time thinking about what is the name, and you came up with StoryOne. Kind of go through that process on how you came to it, and maybe a little bit about what it means. Cameron, do you want to start?
Yeah, sure. Probably first thing we should say is that, as we were thinking about this business, we always referred to it as Project Narwhal. So that was the original name, was Narwhal, which was just a fun way for us to think about this.
And there was a stuffed animal.
And there was a stuffed animal. Yeah. It was just always this fun conversation. But as we
Narwhal Financial.
Narwhal Financial. Yeah, we just loved how playful it was. But as we started to, as the business went from just an idea into actually coming into something we were going to do, we said, okay, what really kind of captures our heart? What is something that really pour ourselves into over the next, 20, 30, 40 years. And at the same time, we were working with Nate and Lacey Ellis with Advocate Creative. And so Lacey one day brought this book to us called The Eden Option. And it kind of highlighted this idea that kind of God has a story for everyone's life, and kind of leaning into God's story for our life is kind of story one, right? And then the alternative is story two, which you kind of leave God's path for your life and kind of pursue your own endeavors. And so that really spoke to our hearts, and really just was kind of an immediate click of like, we want to walk with families and help them lean into story one, into really like what brings their heart to life, what God has for them. And so that was an immediate connection. We loved that idea. And then also just kind of a secondary meaning of, we want to lead with the family story first. We don't want to lead with the balance sheet or, the tax return. We want to lead with what matters to the family. What brings their heart to life? What do they care about? What are they concerned? What are their fears? And it's, it is that story that really drives the work that we do.
And John, what did you think about the name as it progressed?
Yeah. Well, to backtrack 15 years, well, actually probably backtrack about 40 years, I always wanted to be a business owner. I always wanted to be an entrepreneur. So for probably about 15 years, I had a running list of names for a financial planning firm. Just as I would think of things, I would write it down. And so it was fun to kind of go through that process for me. It's a little bit like how we named our children. We started with a list of 100 and we started to eliminate them, right? And so StoryLens, or StoryOne, really resonated with me. Really from a standpoint of like, well, one, the book's name is Eden Option, and it's, I think it acknowledges and gives a tip of the cap to creation. And a part of what we do is we help people steward assets, right? And I believe so much in the Lord's creation that I actually have a daughter named Eden, right? So for me, it was, very, just felt like kind of the Lord's providence, like leading that, StoryOne, just, became our name. And, so it's just really fun. And I do think, it fits well, the funny thing about, everybody kind of jokes about narwhal, but really, if you think about narwhal, like everybody always make fun of it, and I always say, well, they're the unicorn of the sea, right?
They are.
So that's so in business parlance, a unicorn's a very good thing, right? So
It is.
yeah, so it is a thing where we were a little bit of a unicorn in our previous setting, and so kind of being where we are, I would still be happy with Narwhal Financial, but StoryOne's probably a better fit.
It's fun to see the narwhal stuffed animals in various places around the office.
It's a nod. Yeah.
It's definitely a nod.
Yeah.
And it was really cool because we also got to meet the author of the Eden Option, Nathan Lacey. We got to talk to them and understand his perspective
Yeah.
of the book, and because it mattered, we wanted to know,
Yeah.
what his perspective was when he read it. So.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So from that book, we came up with our mission, right, which is heart-led growth. And that pretty much drives all the decisions that we have, whether it's employees internal, whether it's external, and a lot of things have derived from it. One of them is understanding our clients. And we have the StoryLens process that we came up with that helps us shape and understand our clients. So maybe talk a little bit about the StoryLens process, but really kind of the history of what led up to it initially and how things kind of came together.
Yeah. Cam, why don't you walk through it? I think it'd be.
Yeah, sure. So kind of coming back to this theme of heart first and family first, and the story, right? Like we have developed this process that really invites that conversation to be the lead. And so, it's the work that we do is a tricky balance between like minutia, right? Just like granular detail on, what's the basis of the farm you bought back in 1982, all the way through to like, what brings your heart to life? What are you concerned about for your kids, for the future generations? And like, we're trying to kind of capture all of that in one process and say, okay, like that minutia is important and we need to understand it, because part of what we do is we do build a financial independence model that really kind of takes into account your net worth and taxes and those things. And we really do lean into the estate plan and the minutia there. So we do understand, what happens if this, and who has control to do that? But it's all kind of on the chassis of these fundamental core questions that we lean in with families, where we really want to know what brings their heart to life. What are the things that keep them up at night? What are the strengths that are unique to their family that we want to help maximize? And so, that conversation, sometimes it's a couple hours, sometimes it's 3 meetings, and they're 3 hours each because there's just so much to lean into there. And I think, I've learned this from John largely, is that, it does take some time and patience to say, we could move on. We have a good idea, but we're really not there yet. And we kind of ask a fair amount from our clients in that, where we say, actually, like, lean into that a little more. Tell me more, because I think a general response, the first response is, that kind of off the cuff, 10, 15 minute answer. And it gives you a good lay of the land, but it's really like, okay, all right, take a breath. Now let's go a layer deeper, and maybe a layer deeper. And then all of a sudden, the phrase starts coming out like, well, I'm not sure why I'm telling you this, but this, kind of start leaning into a particular pain point or a particular thing that brings them joy and they're proud of.
Or a particular problem within their family.
Yeah. Yeah. Oftentimes it's, and so, and a lot of times those things that are overlooked at first glance end up being a really, really pivotal piece for, and this is actually why we made the decisions we made, because nobody ever wanted to really address that thing. Everyone kind of worked around this particular actor in the family, because if he got upset, it really, everyone got dysregulated. So, and then when we start to know that, we go, that would then make sense why this is owned that way. or this trustee is this trustee. And so it really is just kind of leaning into that at a very deep level, at a very heart level. And I think the planning that comes out of that is so vastly different than leading with, oh, well, if we sell that, then, we can pay fewer taxes. So let's just do that,
John, would you like to add on to that?
Yeah, I think it is interesting. The StoryLens process is something that really we learned quite a bit of it at a prior firm. But then we've kind of just developed it into what we think is kind of the best tool to encapsulate and capture a family's mission, vision, values, and goals. And it is interesting, one of the things that I've just derived over the years is that often the older a family is, or the husband and wife are, is typically who we're working with, kind of the more set or ingrained kind of who they are and where they're headed. Where a lot of times when we start working with younger couples, they're still trying to determine kind of who they are and where they're headed. And both of those have their benefits, and both of those have their drawbacks. But it is, it's a really fun process from a standpoint of it's a good way to get to know somebody. That's a little bit like, hey, we're going to try to cram, a few years worth of friendship into a few meetings here. And, everything we talk about is confidential, and we just want to make sure that we fully grasp, kind of some of the main elements of who you are as a couple. And, then a lot of times we get into the detail on balance sheets, and a lot of times we'll discover things there that are very helpful long term. Same as the estate plan. There's part of the process is reviewing existing estate planning documents, reviewing any legacy trusts that are in place, and then trying to figure out who's the trustee, what assets are in these trusts, how's it taxed, who's paying the tax, like just all the detail. Which then the nice thing is that the StoryLens is designed really to not solve any problems. The StoryLens is really designed for us to get a deep understanding of who that family is. Then, when we start to do other things like the estate design, wealth design, business succession planning, all those types of things, all of a sudden it comes out of this place of strength because we have a deep understanding of who you are and what's important to you. And, there are times where if we implemented before we understood, we could actually do more harm than good. So, there's often times where we'll meet with a family and they'll have a trust, or they'll have an insurance policy, or they'll have XYZ, and we'll ask, why do you have that? And often the answer is, I'm not sure, right? And we just want to make sure that our families understand why they have things and the things that they have are appropriate.
So families are at the heart of everything we do. The mission is heart-led growth. The StoryLens, really tries to help understand what are those heart issues, and so, it's kind of begin with the end in mind, right? Yep. It's 20, 30, 40, 50 years down the road. It's very similar to my daughter. A few days ago, I was doing something with her. She's 18. She's getting ready to go to college. And it's interesting how people and kids, they catch more than what you can teach them. And I've talked to her about financial matters, but just out of the blue, she told me, she just went through graduation. She said, Dad, I got quite a bit of money for graduation in her mind, and I was like, okay, well, that's great. And she kind of paused and she said, I was thinking, Dad, what would the 40-year-old Annie be proud of the 18-year-old Annie with that money? And she said, I think I need to invest. How much should I invest? And I kind of stepped back and I thought, wow, that's really cool that she's thinking about that. But really, that's the StoryLens. It's, at that moment, it gave me an insight into her heart and it showed me that she is catching some things, which is really good. But the StoryLens process is, you're 18, you're 20 or 50, whatever it is,
Yeah.
Looking down the road and saying, and looking back and saying, hey, am I taking care of my family? Did I do the right things? And it's holistic.
Oh yeah.
And
Well, and it is like, and some of these, when you start talking about multi-generational wealth, I mean, it is interesting to look at the far horizon, and the far horizon might be 100 years away, right? So to think about governance that's going to survive and work for 100 years, an entity that's going to survive and work for 100 years, and then often the families we work with are very humble, and when you use the term legacy, often they kind of just pull back because they don't feel like, well, I don't want a legacy, or I'm not worried about my legacy. But it is their legacy, right? And it is this interesting thing of families or people that have generated multi-generational wealth, they're going to impact and change the trajectory of their family. And so it is interesting when you think about the trajectory over 100 years, like what impact do you want to have? So it's one of the really fun parts of our profession and our firm, actually.
Yeah.
So from the StoryLens process, Cameron, a part of that StoryLens is, we covered this a little bit before, but just family dynamics, and really trying to understand that. What are some, we like to say that, each family is unique. What are some unique family dynamics that you've encountered going through the StoryLens process?
Yeah. They're pretty broad, and John mentioned a moment ago, we've got clients that are, when we started working together, they had a lot of wealth, but they didn't even have kids yet, right? And mostly it was still kind of deferral to the previous generation on whatever they'd set, but it was kind of defining, like, what does it mean for us? What do we want it to be? And it's very much like crafting from the beginning. And then we have some families where, there has been a path that has been started back in 1950, 1970, right? Multi-generational businesses or whatever it is. And that energy is like still palpable in the room. It's like those creators of those trusts, those people, like, it's almost like they're present, because they're still, their shadow is still in the decisions that are being made. And so it's like, sometimes with families, you hit a wall and you go, why don't we get hung up on this decision? Like, why couldn't we move forward? And then kind of because we've spent so much time with the family and spend time trying to understand the heart and the relational dynamics, we go back and we go, oh, it's actually because when Dad put that trustee in place 40 years ago, like, the idea of replacing that trustee feels like a disrespect to his who he was, his legacy, right? And then all of a sudden it frames in a new light where you go, oh, okay, well, now this makes sense. And now we kind of work within that framework, or we work to challenge that framework and say, I totally understand why you're in this place, and that makes sense, but let's think about your father's true intent. Wasn't necessarily to name this as the trustee. It's actually to make sure that this thing is stewarded well, and maybe that's not happening currently because the trustee is not the right trustee. So there are a lot of examples where, like, it's not exactly clear why decisions are being made until you can get into the root cause of, oh, this is the true motivator. And you really can't get there unless you've done a lot of work relationally with the family. Yeah.
And John, you've seen a lot of different dynamics going through the process. Do you have any examples or stories that come to mind?
I mean, I think the main thing, just as Cameron was talking, I think the main thing for me is that I think in decision making, it just really proves that everybody's human, right? Whether you're worth $100 million or you're worth $1,000, there's a lot of times that emotion is driving the decision making.
People have emotions.
People do have emotions, right?
Feelings. I like to call them feelings.
And sometimes, the Chip and Dan Heath book, Switch, how to change when change is hard, right? The analogy they use is the elephant and the rider, right? The rider is logic, the elephant is emotion. And the rider can get the elephant to go anywhere for a very short period of time, but eventually the elephant's going to go where it wants, right? So the subtitle of that book is How to Change When Change is Hard, right? So there are times where we're working with a family and it's like we need to lay out the path and we need to remove barriers and we need to make it as easy as possible for them to make wise long-term decisions. But then at a certain level, they still need to walk across the bridge or they need to walk down that path. And so it is a thing where it's like often we're just called to serve the family and we're called to help the family. And there are times where, quite frankly, the decision that they would make or that they do make may not be the most tax advantaged decision, may not be the most long-term impact, but it is like the decision is the one we're going to make today. And so it is a thing where it's like often we try to keep our eye on the horizon, but we also need to work on the reality of the situation today. And so it is a thing where it's like, I mean, and really that's quite frankly part of the benefit of all multifamily office is, you know, there's a lot of families we work with where we work with 2 or 3 generations. So if you're working with 2 or 3 generations, one is there's a continuity of care there that's consistent from the first generation to the second. But then it is a thing also that as the decision makers change, you could potentially correct a little bit more to get on point of where you want to be on that far horizon. Because it is a thing where, again, like there's not necessarily a right or wrong answer. Sometimes there is the best answer. And so it is a thing where, again, a multifamily office often allows you to work on those things over time. You know, because when we work with families, I mean, when we start working with a family, I say, like, I want to work with you for the rest of my career, right? We're not like a one-stop shop. It's not like come in and, you know, we'll put a lift on your truck or come in and we'll put a turbocharger on your truck. It's like come in and we'll help you have cars for the rest of your life kind of thing. So, yeah.
I know one of the things that I greatly appreciate about both of you is you are willing to make recommendations that are well thought out, but you're also willing to kind of step back and it kind of reminds me of a pastor who gave a sermon several years back, and he was talking about a very difficult issue, and he had a rubber band, a very simple rubber band. And the whole gist of it was that in most decisions, you have the truth of the matter, and then you have the continuum of grace. And the further grace and truth get, the more tension there is.
Yep.
And a lot of times it's difficult to talk truth with grace for a family or bringing that in. And you guys do a really good job of that. You're willing to speak truth with grace and understand the situations as you're walking through the StoryLens process.
Yeah. And
so thank you for that. I know I appreciate it in my life. With that, the StoryLens focuses on several things. One is a lot of our families are charitably inclined. So talk a little bit about maybe charitable organizations or what people do or some things that they navigate towards as they're kind of going through the StoryLens process.
Yeah.
Good, John.
Yeah, it is. The majority of our families are charitably inclined, and some of that's they donate to charity while living. Some of it they'll donate to charity when they pass. And it is interesting. The primary vehicle that we use is our donor advised funds. We love donor advised funds because they're easy to use. And basically, a donor advised fund works as for lack of a better term, an account that you can put assets in today, and then you can grant them to charities over time. So, but it's super easy from an administrative standpoint. And, one of the things that a lot of times, just like as an example, like when someone's getting ready to go through an exit, someone's getting ready to sell a business, a lot of times we'll recommend what they call a pre-sale gift. And so we want to make a gift. You can make a gift of a non-publicly traded stock to a donor advised fund and receive a really good tax benefit. That tax benefit is multifaceted. One is you get a tax deduction for the fair market value of that gift. And then on the back side, that donor advised fund doesn't pay capital gains on the exit. So a lot of times, when we're working with people are going through an exit, it might be a tech company or something that they may have worked in for years, so it has a very low basis. So getting out of it has a very high tax impact. So if we can make a donation of that stock prior to a sale, we can help that client save a lot of money. But then really back to kind of the heart of the matter or what's important, it's often then, so now we have $5 million in a donor advised fund, or we've got $10 million in a donor advised fund, or we're going to have $50 million in a donor advised fund. Well, now you need to decide where that money's going charitably, right? And a lot of times families understand how they give while they're living, but then it is like, how do I communicate that to the next generation? Or how do I communicate that to my friends that are going to make decisions on my donor advised fund? And a lot of our clients are very faith-based. And often some of the things that bring families the most joy is giving to small ministries. But there's often times where these small ministries would be a problem if somebody gifted them $5 or $10 million, right? So how are you going to basically have an endowment to help that ministry over the long run when it might be damaging for them to receive a large gift all at once? So we help on both sides. One is like, how do you save dollars on the tax side, but then really the governance to help make decisions over the long term. And that's one of the joys really of working with families, is helping make those types of decisions.
Yeah. Yeah, on the charitable side, it's difficult. And I think this is just like a human weakness is our inability to comprehend compounding growth. Like, as simple as that is, it's like, yeah, you kind of get it in concept, and then you go, no, really, in 40 years, when you are probably close to your deathbed and your kids inherit this donor advised fund, it might have $85 million in it. Mm-hmm. And the idea that they're going to manage that, without some good guidance, structure, governance, like it's not going to go great unless we're very intentional. Mm-hmm. And so just kind of casting that vision of saying, hey, this is not like a far-fetched idea. Like, this is more than likely going to happen, even if you run a growth rate at 6%, right? This wealth compounds. And so how do we then kind of create a governance structure? How do you kind of create a path for when do we, Annie's 18. When does she get to start sitting on the giving board for the family? How does she get to learn to do that, right? Is it a $20,000 annual kind of thing that she's doing? Is it more than that? Like, how do you build that muscle over time and train them to really kind of, one, understand your heart, build their own identity in it. But then again, all of this is just shepherding wealth well, right? And we want it to be something that is life-giving, both for the family or the children who are giving, but also to the charities. And so there's just a lot of intentionality involved in that process and quite a bit of work. And, it's not uncommon that we're working with business owners who were really, really good at business, and they were super focused on the business, and then that was generating wealth. But like, they haven't yet really turned their lens to, oh, now there's this significant thing over here that's kind of taking on a life of its own because it's growing and it's invested in all these different things. And like, oh, now I need to really turn my attention to how do I steward this as well as I stewarded my business for the last 30 years. So it's really rewarding work. It's fun. And it's fun to see where charitable dollars go and the impact it has. It's just, just to even kind of be on the sidelines of that, it's just rewarding and fun work.
Well, and then kind of on the ongoing, like there's like these big gifts, right? Mm-hmm. At the end of somebody's life, there's a big gift when I sell my business. There's like, but then there's also like, there's kind of two other places where, people do a lot of times tithe or make a certain they're going to give a certain percentage of their income or their wealth to charity every year. But then there's also kind of these ad hoc things that happen, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we have a client that had owned a vacation home since like 1987. They didn't want to use the vacation home anymore, so they're like, well, let's sell it.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't need the proceeds, and it was going to be a pretty big capital gains hit. So we took the vacation home and we put it in the donor advised fund, and the donor advised fund sold it. So they end up with a chunk of money in their donor advised fund. They get a tax deduction. They avoid the capital gain. So it is this thing like, so on the ongoing, it's often a charitable giving is a big part of what we do from a standpoint of just helping families think about, one is like, hey, if we're going to put $1 million or $2 million in a donor advised fund this year, where's that coming from? And then it is more like the ad hoc, hey, we're getting ready to sell this piece of real estate. We're getting ready to sell this venture capital thing, this private equity thing. So it is more of like, it's rarely is it a one and done. It's more just becomes more of an annual rhythm of kind of what's going on. So, you know, and while you were talking, one of the interesting stats that's just like mind blowing, Warren Buffett, it's like, again, like this power of compound interest.
Mm-hmm.
Like Warren Buffett, it's something like 85% of his wealth happened after age 65. Right?
That's powerful.
Well, and that's what we see on these pro formas, because what happens is people are accumulating wealth. Then what happens is that wealth is either invested in the stock market, private equity, private real estate, venture capital, whatever it is, and they're not consuming enough of that income to keep it level. And what happens often is it just starts to climb a wall, right? So this thought of like compounding interest is super powerful. And it is, again, it's like one of the eighth wonders of the world. Like,
it really is.
So, yeah. So it is just, it's fun to, you know, geek out on spreadsheets and run some pro formas and be like, actually, this is going to be something we need to figure out over the long term. So
that's what we do.
Yeah.
So we've covered quite a bit in this podcast. We talked about what a name is. We talked about how StoryOne came to be. Talked about the heart of the StoryLens, which is the StoryLens podcast, and every family's unique. And we try to understand their heart and where they want to go. And then an important piece of that is the charitable side of things. It's very, very important. So having the experience of different types of structures for people to, quite frankly, be able to give more, who have, you know, charitable hearts, they're inclined to do that. It's important to have that experience. So grateful to be here with you, John and Cameron, on this podcast as we close up. Thank you to everybody who took this journey with us on the StoryLens podcast. We encourage everybody to follow our podcast on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcast. And we hope you guys have a wonderful day.
Thanks, Kenny.
We should probably note that this is our second podcast, and John has now cried in both of them.
Yeah.
So we're going to see if that's just going to
He's
be
100%. Stay tuned.
Across all podcasts.
Thank you for joining us on the StoryLens podcast. If you are navigating complex financial decisions, we are here to help. We know your story is anything but ordinary, and that's why we start there, because the right solutions are as unique as you are.
StoryOne Family Office, LLC, or StoryOne is a registered investment advisor, RIA, registered with the United States Securities and Exchange Commission, SEC. Registration as an investment advisor does not imply a certain level of skill or training, and the content of this communication has not been approved or verified by the United States Securities and Exchange Commission or by any state securities authority. StoryOne renders individualized investment advice to persons in a particular state only after complying with the state's regulatory requirements or pursuant to an applicable state exemption or exclusion. All investments carry risk, and no investment strategy can guarantee a profit or protect from loss of capital. Past performance is not indicative of future results. This podcast is intended for informational purposes only and is not intended as the sole basis for financial decisions, nor shall this be construed as advice for the financial needs of any individual. StoryOne is not permitted to offer, and no statements made during this podcast should constitute legal or tax advice. The information contained herein has been compiled by independent third parties, have been obtained from sources who are believed to be reliable. However, accuracy and completeness cannot be guaranteed by StoryOne.